The gavel never struck the wood. It hovered in midair, frozen above the polished bench of courtroom 4B, as if time itself had forgotten how to move. A hush swept the room, so complete that even the fluorescent light seemed to dim. Standing at the center of it all was a boy no older than 8. His dark eyes, wide but unflinching, were fixed on one person, the judge. With a trembling finger, he pointed directly at her and said, in a voice that quivered with innocence and something deeper, "Ancient, you're my real mother." The silence cracked like glass. "I remember your perfume," the boy continued, "and your lullabies, the one about the mockingbird. You used to sing it at night." At that moment, the courtroom, normally a space of rehearsed protocol and detached procedure, became something else entirely. Alive, electric, breathless. At the bench, Judge Alina Harper, known in the New Haven legal community as the iron spine of family court, felt something she hadn't let herself feel in over 15 years. Fear, not the kind born of danger, but the kind that awakens when truth claws its way through walls you thought were sealed for good. Her hand, still suspended in the air, let go. The gavel clattered to the desk with a sharp, final sound. She didn't blink. Couldn't. Her gaze remained locked on the child, her mind an ocean of fragments. That voice, those eyes, that birthmark? She had ruled over thousands of cases, seen hundreds of children, but this one, this boy named Noah Brooks, held something in his face that refused to be filed away and forgotten. Noah had entered the courtroom accompanied by his foster parents, Mr. and Mrs. Winslow, a quiet couple from suburban Connecticut who spoke gently but with the undercurrent of exhaustion. They had filed for permanent custody, saying Noah had behavioral difficulties and attachment fantasies. Those fantasies, as documented in the case file, included drawings of courtroom benches, women in black robes, and a recurring theme, a judge singing lullabies. Social workers called it trauma-induced projection. Alina had heard it all before. Children are looking for comfort in imagined narratives. Children stitching wounds with stories that made abandonment feel survivable. But as she now stared into the eyes of the boy standing before her, those familiar theories crumbled. Because she knew the song he spoke of. Because she still wore that perfume. Because 15 years ago, she had made a decision she believed she would never be forced to revisit. Noah's sudden declaration had shattered every wall she had built, carefully, painfully around a choice that had nearly broken her. She had been 27, a rising star, a future judge. A single mistake, a pregnancy, threatened to undo everything her family had worked for. She had named him Daniel, just for herself, just for the 2 hours she had been allowed to hold him in the hospital room before the private agency came and took him away. Now here he was, standing in her courtroom, calling her back into a truth she thought time had buried. Chaos rippled through the room. The Winslows looked mortified. Social workers whispered into phones. Lawyers stood and objected, while bailiffs instinctively moved toward the child. But Alina raised a hand, barely, but it was enough to still the noise. She looked down at Noah, his small form brave, his voice echoing inside her rib cage, and whispered, not aloud but inside, "Please, God, don't let this be real. Because if it is, then everything I built stands on a lie." "Recess," she said, her voice dry as dust. 30 minutes. Everyone out. The courtroom emptied slowly, the air thick with the weight of what had just happened. Alina Harper remained on the bench, unmoving, until the door finally closed. Then she reached beneath her desk into the deepest drawer. Her hand closed around something thin, weathered. A photograph. A baby boy with dark eyes, a crescent-shaped birthmark on his left wrist, and a name she had whispered only once 15 years ago, in a room with no witnesses but God. Daniel, or Noah, and maybe both. The chambers of Judge Alina Harper were a sanctuary of order, mahogany bookshelves lined with old law journals, diplomas framed in brushed gold, a wall clock that ticked with unnerving precision. But today, none of it gave her peace. The photograph sat on her desk, too loud for something so silent. She hadn't looked at it in years, not really, just once every birthday. Or when grief overwhelmed her defenses and she pulled it from the drawer like a secret sin. But now that boy, Noah Brooke, wasn't just a memory tucked behind folders. He was real, breathing, standing in her courtroom and naming her with a certainty that no paperwork could dismiss. Her phone buzzed. It was her clerk. "Judge Harper," she said quietly. "CPS has moved the child for psychological evaluation. Standard procedure after an emotional outburst in court." Alina nodded to no one. "Thank you." She ended the call and sat still for several minutes, the photograph clutched in one hand, her other trembling as it reached for her teacup. Earl Grey, the same kind she drank when she was pregnant. The scent pulled her back. The quiet hours at night when she'd sit with her hands resting on her stomach, whispering soft promises to the child inside. Her son, the one she gave away to keep her career, to protect a name. And now that child, Noah, remembered things he should never remember. "Your perfume," he had said, "your lullabies." God help her, he'd even named the song. She rose and crossed to the far shelf where a file lay hidden behind framed legal accolades. It wasn't official, just something she'd compiled years ago in a moment of desperation. Her son's name is in hospital records, adoption agency papers. The name of the handler who had arranged it all, Lloyd Merrow from Hearthway Adoption Services, a man who promised discretion for women who couldn't afford scandal. Alina had called it courage back then, but now it tasted like cowardice. She picked up her phone again and dialed a number she hadn't used in over a decade. "David Knox," came the answer, a former detective turned private investigator, one of the few people Alina trusted to guard what she couldn't afford to expose. "It's me," she said, her voice barely audible. "I need your help. It's urgent." "Are you in danger?" "No," she replied, "but someone I failed might be." Silence. "Name?" She hesitated, then, "Noah Brooks, 8 years old. I need everything. Birth records, CPS files, foster history, and David." She paused, swallowing. "Run a DNA trace against this list I'll send you, for my biological son. He would be about 8 now." "You think he's yours?" "I don't think," Alina said slowly. "I know." Across the city at the Child Protective Services building, Noah sat in a too-big chair under two harsh lights. A psychologist named Carmen Liu knelt before him, trying to coax words from a child who had already spoken too much. But Noah was quiet now. His eyes weren't blank. They were waiting. "I'm not crazy," he finally said. "No one thinks you are," Dr. Liu replied gently. "Yes, they do. They always do." He looked past her to the window. "But she knew the song, the smell. I remember her hands. She used to hold me like this." He made a cradling motion, his fingers trembling. "And I remember crying when they took me." Dr. Liu nodded, taking careful notes. "Do you remember where you were before that?" "A hospital. It smelled like lemons. She had a white coat over her chair. There was a blue blanket with stars. She called me Daniel." Dr. Liu blinked. That detail hadn't been public. It hadn't even been in the records. Back in her office, Alina stood at the window overlooking the city skyline. Everything she had fought for, every inch of respect, every judgment handed down with certainty, now felt brittle. Because if Noah was truly her son, then the system she upheld had not only failed him, it had weaponized her silence. And if he remembered her after all those years, after all that abandonment, then maybe she hadn't vanished from his heart. Maybe she still had a chance to face the past, to choose again, to be a mother, not in name but in truth. The scent of wet asphalt hung over the city the next morning, soaking the courthouse steps in the sullen gray sheen. But inside her chambers, Judge Alina Harper was already awake, already changed. Gone was the Iron Lady of Justice. Composed, clinical, infallible. What remained was a woman haunted by what she might have lost and what she might be standing on the verge of reclaiming. The file David Knox delivered was thick. Mismatched pages, redacted forms, broken trails of identity. But she devoured every word. Noah Brooks, born July 13, 2015, entered the foster system at age 3 after his parents, Jennifer and Marcus Brooks, died in a house fire. But there were no death certificates, no hospital admission, no dental records, just names that floated like ash. Sterling Services Adoption Agency. Alina froze. That name was on her own closed file, on the original paperwork from the private arrangement she had made 8 years ago, back when Hathaway had supposedly handled the placement. But Sterling had absorbed Hathaway 2 months later. She stood, pacing. If Noah had entered the system under a fabricated identity, if those files were deliberately scrubbed, then he wasn't just lost, he was erased, and someone had wanted it that way. She called David immediately. We need to trace every child processed through Sterling between 2015 and 2018. Focus on those without birth certificates or sealed hospital records. That could be hundreds, Alina, he replied. And someone went to a lot of trouble to cover those trails. I don't care how long it takes, she said. Start with Noah. I need to know who gave that child a false name and why. Across town, Noah sat quietly on the porch steps of his emergency foster home. Patricia Carter, a kind but exhausted woman in her 60s, had laid out toast and cocoa, but he hadn't touched them. Instead, he clutched a worn spiral notebook. He wrote in it every day, stories, drawings, fragments of memory. One page today read, "There's a blue wall with butterflies and a rocking chair that sings when it creaks. She sang Hush Little Baby, even when she was crying." Below it, a drawing, a courtroom with one figure in a robe, dark eyes, solemn face. Beneath it, in shaky block letters, Judge A.H. Patricia stepped outside, gently setting down a blanket. "That song you hum," she said, sitting beside him. "Where did you hear it?" Noah stared ahead. From her, she smelled like vanilla and books. "Books?" He nodded. "She used to read me one with a lion. I can't remember the ending, but she said the lion always comes back." Patricia's heart clenched. These weren't fantasies. These were anchored memories rooted in something real. She had fostered over 60 children. She'd seen trauma, confusion, and projection. But Noah's recollections were precise, and worse, consistent. "You still believe she's your mom?" "I don't believe," Noah whispered. "I know." That evening, Judge Harper stood outside the building that once housed Sterling Family Services, now a gutted shell, graffitied and abandoned. The official story said it folded due to financial mismanagement, but whispers said something darker. Sealed investigations, destroyed files, too many children placed with no trace. Alina walked the perimeter, her heels silent on the damp pavement. Then she saw it, carved into a cement step, nearly erased by time. DW 2015. Her breath caught. Those initials, Daniel William, the name she had whispered to her son in the hospital when no one else was around, the name she had never written on any document. Trembling, she pulled out her phone and texted David. "I think Sterling never placed him. I think they took him and sold his identity." The reply came back almost immediately. "Working theory confirmed. I traced a hidden archive, encrypted files, and one shows a payment, $250K, for a disappearance package. The client, Meredith Harper, her mother." Alina's stomach dropped. The woman who raised her to value justice had paid to erase her grandchild. The townhouse on Rosewood Avenue hadn't changed in 20 years. The brass lion knocker was polished as always. The curtains inside were pulled taut in symmetrical pleats. To the neighbors, the Harper residence was a symbol of dignity, legacy, and tradition. But tonight, under the pale glow of street lamps, it looked like a monument to everything unspoken. Judge Alina Harper stood at the gate for a long moment, staring at the home where her life had once been scripted like a legal brief, concise, calculated, controlled. Then she rang the bell. The door opened within seconds. Alina? Meredith Harper's voice still held that calm, measured tone. You didn't call. I didn't come to call, Alina said. I came for answers. Her mother stepped aside wordlessly. The inside of the house was as pristine as ever. Ivory walls, crown molding, and the faint scent of lilac and lemon polish. Every item in its place, just like Meredith liked it. But Alina could feel the tension coiling beneath the surface, tight as piano wire. They sat across from each other in the formal parlor. Alina didn't wait. She pulled a folded printout from her coat pocket and placed it on the table. It was a financial ledger, a wire transfer from Meredith Harper's private trust, dated October 28, 2015, labeled simply, Sterling Family Services, Special Arrangement, amount, $250,000. Her mother stared at the paper, eyes unblinking. You paid them to erase him, Alina said softly, to bury my son. Meredith didn't deny it. She leaned back slowly, her fingers folding over her lap like she was preparing for a deposition. You were 27, unmarried, and on track to become the youngest assistant district attorney in the city. That child would have destroyed your future. That child is Noah Brooks, Alina whispered. He's alive, in foster care. He remembers me. He remembers this house. Meredith's eyes narrowed, the veneer cracking. Then you need to make sure he forgets, for your sake. For his. You're not hearing me. I found him and he found me. Alina, Meredith said, her voice cold now, clinical. If you expose this, your career is over. Your judgments will be challenged. Your name dragged through headlines. Every ruling you've ever made will be questioned. You'll lose everything. Alina stood slowly. Then let me lose it. Her mother rose as well, the distance between them now a chasm that felt decades wide. You don't understand, Meredith hissed. You were never supposed to find him. That's what I paid for. I protected you. No, Alina said. You protected a legacy, not me. She turned without waiting for a response and walked out the door. She didn't look back. That night, Alina drove to the group home where Noah had been temporarily placed. She sat across from him in the common room, a dimly lit space with plastic chairs and vending machines humming like tired sentinels. Noah was coloring, a courtroom scene, again. But this time there was a woman on the bench and a small boy standing before her, not in fear but in recognition. A red heart hovered between them. He looked up at her with those eyes. Did you find out? He asked. Was I right? Alina swallowed the lump in her throat. You were right, she whispered. You remembered things most people forget. He studied her face for a long time. I knew you were her, he said, even before you spoke. Why didn't you say something sooner? She asked. Because grown-ups don't like it when kids remember too much. Alina reached out. Noah, I'm your mother, and I'm going to do everything I can to make sure you're never lost again. He nodded, but his voice was small. They said I wasn't wanted. You were never unwanted, Alina said, her voice trembling. You were stolen. As she walked back to her car, her phone buzzed. David Knox. His voice was low and urgent. I got into a second archive. Hidden files. There's more. Much more. Sterling wasn't just a disappearing baby. He was assigning them. Alina stopped. Assigning. Some kids were redirected to homes chosen not for love, but for leverage. Kids of lawyers, prosecutors, and even judges, including yours. She sank into the driver's seat. And the worst part, Knox added, some of these homes were paid to suppress their memories. Punishment-based reconditioning. We're talking psychological warfare. Your son was one of them. Alina didn't speak. Her grip tightened around the steering wheel. We've only scratched the surface, Knox said. Are you still in? Alina looked up at the stars through her windshield, the sky cold and wide and watching. Yes, she said. Let's bring it all down. The media vans began showing up at 6:42 a.m. By 7 o'clock, the steps of the Detroit family court were covered in microphones, camera tripods, and a crowd that had grown from whispers into thunder. Words like judicial misconduct, missing child, and underground adoptions crackled through the buzz like static. But in courtroom 12B, Tom Fawn Alina Harper stood alone, not behind the bench, at the defendant's table. Across the aisle, Robert Sterling, still smug despite the orange jumpsuit, sat beside his attorney, a man with a voice like silk and eyes that never blinked. The courtroom, packed with onlookers, watched as one of the state's most respected judges was put on trial. Not for crimes of corruption, but for breaking laws to expose them. But Alina wasn't here to defend her career. She was here for Noah. When the prosecution rested its case, arguing that she'd used her position to stage an unauthorized investigation, that she compromised public trust, Alina stood. No lawyer will speak for me, she said. I will speak for myself. The courtroom tensed. She took the stand and began not with her defense but her confession. I had a child when I was 27, she said quietly, and I gave him up, not because I didn't love him, but because I was told that motherhood and justice could not live in the same room. I was told by people I trusted, my mother, my mentors, that choosing my son meant giving up my name, my robe, my future. So I signed a paper. I believed I was giving my son a better life, but I was wrong. She paused. When I saw him 8 years later, Noah, standing in my courtroom, I recognized him not with my eyes, but with something deeper. He knew me. He remembered things I had long buried. And that moment shattered every truth I thought I'd built. She told them about the ledger, about the forged adoption, about the other children, some trafficked, others brutalized into silence, about the system she had spent her life defending, only to discover it was rooted in rot. And then she said something no judge ever expected to say under oath. I broke the law to honor a higher one. The courtroom was still. Even Sterling seemed to falter, just slightly. She stepped down from the stand with the quiet dignity of someone who had finally stopped hiding. The jury took 18 hours. When they returned, the courtroom stood as one. The foreperson read the verdict. On the charges of abuse of power, obstruction of justice, and judicial misconduct, we find the defendant not guilty. And then came the addendum, spoken in a voice tight with emotion. We further state that Judge Harper's actions, though unconventional, brought to light systemic corruption that endangered hundreds of children. We recommend no further disciplinary action, but instead that the state takes steps to reform the institutions that failed her and them. The gavel fell, but it didn't feel like an ending. It felt like the beginning of something honest. 1 year later, the old family court building had been shuttered. In its place stood the Harper Center for Child Justice, a new hub for trauma-informed advocacy, legal aid, and system reform, fueled in part by funds seized from the Sterling Network. Noah walked beside Alina through the center's garden, where they had planted a small patch of crocuses, his idea, because they were the first flowers that bloom even after winter tries to kill everything. He was 10 now, brighter than ever, quieter sometimes, but whole. Inside, a plaque had been mounted near the entrance. For every child whose memory was doubted, for every mother who was told she had to choose. This house stands because truth survived the silence. Moral of the story, this story is not just about justice in court, it's about the courage to confront the systems that silence love, fracture families, and cloak cruelty in policy. Alina Harper's journey reminds us, the law is not always just, but justice is always worth fighting for. Systems can be repaired, but only if we are brave enough to expose their brokenness. Memory is not a weakness in children. It is a form of resistance. And motherhood, in its purest form, will walk through fire if it means protecting a child. Even when the gavel says order and the world tells you to forge, some truths refuse to die because love doesn't need permission. It remembers. It returns. And when it does, it rewrites everything.